Good evening. Welcome to the Toronto Debating Society. Tonight is January 14th, 2014, and this is a regular debate. The resolution is the Senate should be abolished. The first speaker is the Prime Minister, David, who will speak for 7 minutes. Please welcome David.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our resolution tonight that the Senate should be abolished, and by the Senate we mean the upper house of the Canadian Parliament, and by abolish we mean struck from existence. It's important to note that tonight's resolution does not mean the Senate is presently constituted. We are talking about the Canadian Senate, but not the Senate under its present configuration, because it was felt that that would be unfair to the government to argue from that point. Rather, it refers to the concept of a Senate per se, the very idea of a Senate, as the upper house of a Parliament. We will not only argue that the present Senate should be abolished, but that Parliament should consist of a single House of Commons, and that no amount of constitutional reform can provide us with an upper house that would make any improvement in governance over what a single House can provide. And we will use 3 arguments. The first one will deal with the appointed Senate. An appointed Senate. It's inimical, it's contrary to what it means to have a level of Parliament established over time solely at the whim of the Prime Ministers. And we will argue that this is inherently unconstitutional. Our second argument will have to do with the notion of the Senate as a house of the provinces. In the triple E model of the Senate, one of the E's stands for equal and assumes that the senators will be chosen equally from the provinces or from the regions, and that they will safeguard the national interest, the House of the Provinces. They will safeguard the national interest over the warring factions that go on in the lower House of Commons that will only look after provincial interest. And we will show that this view is hopelessly naive. Our third argument has to do with the Senate's other role concerning legislation, and that is that it will act as a restraint on an impetuous lower house, the so-called chamber of sober second thought. And we will show that this view is just as fanciful as that of the House of the Provinces. My first argument, having to do with an appointed Senate. Senators have to be either elected or appointed, and in some legislatures around the world they have a mixture of them. But we will deal with the appointed model that we have now. In the recent uproar over the Senate's election expenses scandal, the complaint that came through most often was that these people were appointees, and how dare they spend our money simply by virtue of being appointed by government. It was felt that this plundering of the public purse was all that we could expect from appointees, and especially appointees who were specifically hired to shill for the government. So naturally the travel expenses of Wallen and Duffy were incurred as a result of sounding the government's trumpet across the land. The original view of the Senate was that of an upper house. The appointments clause was intended to remove the Senate from the political winds and give it a kind of safe, ethical and moral harbour. But now that rosy vision seems almost naive from today's perspective. Senators, who for the most part are party hacks, bagmen, defeated candidates, campaign contributors and so forth, are appointed by governments. And that ensures that these patronage appointments will follow party lines, and that any pretense of non-partisan judgment is laughable. Even the chamber itself is divided along party lines, with opposing benches. They have government whips, government house leaders, and so forth, just as in the Commons. There is not even a pretense of impartiality. So whatever the rationale for an appointed level of government in other nations or cultures, it does not meet Lincoln's requirement as a democracy defined as government of the people, by the people, and for the people. and consequently, it has no place in a democracy. Our second argument has to do with an elected Senate being a house of the provinces. Also in the Triple E model, E means equal, so that we would have an equal number of senators chosen from each region and so forth. Now this runs into some serious practical shoals because it bogs down legislation and bogs down argument. For example, in the US, we constantly see legislation being hammered back and forth and eventually being defeated entirely because they can't get agreement from two houses. So legislation that's passed in the lower house and the House of Representatives founders in the upper house where we have 2 senators per state. So we have 100 senators. But the minority of the population living in the interior Republican states can overturn and block legislation even though the majority of the people living in the coastal Democratic states have no voice there. It's simply overturned. So Obamacare suffers this, all kinds of legislation. We have the same thing in Canada, for example. We cannot have there are dire warnings about the possibility of any kind of constitutional reform because the Maritimes and Quebec can block anything. Even the Senate reform itself has to go through that process. So this equality results in a kind of reverse gerrymandering, where the smaller states or the smaller provinces can overturn the large ones. And also we want to notice the fact that these people, these senators, even though they are elected in equal amounts, they still represent ridings and they still represent parties. So there's no guarantee that they are going to look after the affairs of the country as a whole because of the political pressures back home in their ridings. Finally, the chamber of sober second thought. Well, I come from a very small province where we know our politicians. And in my day, I have met a couple of denizens of that august chamber who have not had a second thought in their lives. Very few first ones for that matter, and none sober. Okay? So what we have here, we have shown that elected senators can be co-opted by the regional sentiments that propels them to office, and therefore we submit that the Senate should be abolished. Thank you very much.
Very good. The next speaker is the leader of the opposition, who will speak for 7 minutes. Please help me welcome Dean.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, we have before us an argument that the Senate should be abolished, and we've received 3 arguments from the government that the problem is that it's appointed, therefore unconstitutional, that it has become a house of provinces, being equal in representation, and that it is a restraint on the lower house and the passing of laws, and that its sober second thought is not so, it's more sobering perhaps. Well, I would like to suggest that, in fact, the Senate does not need to be abolished. And I will ask you this question. Should you have a problem with your car and the tires, or a carburetor that doesn't work anymore, or a trunk latch that doesn't open, do you sell your car? No. You get it repaired. You fix it. Why? Because it's cheaper, it's less complicated, and it works as fixed. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are suggesting on the opposition that, in fact, changes be made. We don't want it wholesale abolished. We want changes to be made. So, the scandal, of course, has been in the news lately. Scandals have been in the news all the time, and they come and go. And the government appears to be hurt that these senators are cheating the public, are doing this. Well, the House of Commons cheats the public all the time, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get rid of them too? They're suggesting the Senate should go. Maybe we'll suggest the House of Commons go too, and we'll just have nobody governing. Politicians are politicians. They will do what they do to get reelected or get public attention or whatever. I will suggest, in an article that Barbara McDougall, who is a conservative from the Brian Mulrooney era, wrote in the Globe and Mail in October last year, that in fact the Senate of which she speaks was consisting of not just hacks and old politicians where they go to die and get a whole pile of cheap money, but in fact they're specialists in fields that are very diverse when they are doing what they're supposed to do, which is review legislation. Just because the current government and the current Senate are the same political stripe and everything flows through like a flood of water doesn't mean that there is a problem with the Senate. They should be reviewing line by line. And she says, Senator McEachen, who was a liberal, used to harass his own House of Commons with bills that were not sufficiently useful to the people they were to apply to. And he got line by line checks for budget information and the like. So the issue of the scandal, in fact, is that it functions as it should, as a review. This is the sober second thought, which is the third point, but nonetheless, it brings into the whole issue of what is the scandal. There is no scandal. The scandal is that the government is getting away with murder and the Senate is not standing up and saying, hold on a second, slow down. Government by the people, for the people. We can stand with an elected Senate. Australia has had an elected Senate since 1901 and it functions fine. Yes, there are problems, but that's what politics is. It's dirty, but it works. And as Churchill has said, democracy is the best, to paraphrase him anyway, is the best choice of political systems. The fact that it's a House of Provinces, that's what happens when the Constitution was created. It had to represent the smaller provinces because Ontario and Quebec had huge populations compared to the Maritimes. So there had to be a way to bring everybody in with equal representation. Now, British Columbia has 6 senators. Meanwhile, New Brunswick has 9, I believe. In any case, it's more for a population that's less. The point is, do the senators represent the views of Canadians? Yes, they will be partisan, same as the House of Commons. But if they can be an august body of review and reflection in the Red Chamber, they will serve the purpose to all Canadians overall, to address the issues of law and constitutional matters and whatever else comes before them. The Senate scandal has brought to the fore the fact that government doesn't always work when the House of Commons doesn't always work. The Senate, even though there are 4 in particular who are being looked at through the scandal and others that have minor problems as well, for the most part, they're functioning well. Yes, they are appointed. That can be changed. It can be an election. That's the process that could be decided. Yes, it's a constitutional matter. And no, it's not going to be changed overnight. But the idea is that the Senate serves the purpose for which it was created, which is to offer an opposite but useful, as well a useful view to that of the House of Commons. The House of Commons often is a local issue or a provincial issue, even though it's in a federal realm. And the Senate can be also a regional, but also a national issue. And bringing those together can help the political process in Canada work. Because the system is not working right at this instant, it does not mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to look at Senate reform, and if it's a triple E Senate that we decide on, that's fine. Likely it will not happen because 7 provinces have to agree, and a certain amount of the population as well. But starting the discussion, similar to the issue of proportional representation, ironically, is something that needs to be done. And it's something that the senators themselves should be talking about. They should not fear for their jobs. They should be working towards the best interests of all Canadians. This is why you should defeat the motion.
The next speaker is the member of the government, Adrian, who will speak for 5 minutes. Please help me welcome Adrian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The motion before you tonight is that the Senate should be abolished. I'm first going to have some rebuttals, and then I'm going to get into some new arguments. Dean was talking about a car being repaired and fixed, but the Senate is so seriously damaged it can't be fixed like that. He's suggesting that there be some other reform, but he's also suggesting that it's not working and it's not good if he's doing that. 7 provinces agreeing to reform the Senate is not easy. They're not going to work together. That's not going to be a good thing. He says that they actually review and do good stuff with the laws, but what really happens? Do they really do that? Or do they just come in there and just vote in favor of whatever law and pass it? That's what I believe more too. What I find too what I find too is that in politics, the politicians elected, they're more accountable. They can redo that. That there is a different thing like that can happen. Also too, as he mentioned Barbara McDougall, and I'll touch a little bit later on that. Okay, I'm gonna do my new arguments next. My first argument is party patronage. So whether it's any time like Trudeau, Chrétien, Mulroney, whatever, Harper, they all put their own, as he would say, put their own friends and people in there, and it turns it into a partisan affair, and it doesn't help the effectiveness of it at all. One of the most serious issues I think was with Brian Mulroney, and he was talking about the Mulroney government and Barbara McDougall. But what happened was Brian Mulroney was trying to pass the GST, the sales tax, through the Senate. And what happened was there were a lot of Liberals in the Senate who would vote against it. There were 54 Liberal seats. 2 of the 5 independent seats were going to support the Liberals. And the Tories had 34 seats in the Senate. So what did he do? On August 30th, he appointed Consiglio Dinino, Pat Carney, Mario Bolio, Nancy Teed, and Joe Como. September 7th, he appointed Don Oliver, John Sylvan, Robert Layton, and Richard Hatfield. September 12th, John Buchanan and Noel A. Kinsella. September 23rd, Trevor Ayton, Andrew Thompson, John Lynn Staunton, Claude Castanet, Mabel DeWare, and James Keller. And then what happened on September 27th was that he used a constitutional clause to put in what are called the GST senators, which were Michael Meighan, Norman Grimard, Janice Johnson, James Ross, Michael Forrestal, Therese Levoix, Eric Bernstein, and Wilbert Lee Corwell, and they were put in there, and it changed the way the Senate was working. It as I said, he took it from a side where it was Trudeau Liberals and very liberal, and he made it conservative, using a constitutional clause, doing all these appointments, and trying to rig the Senate so he can just pass his GST bill. And this type of stuff really has to be stopped. My next new argument is cushiony jobs. Well, if you're a senator today, you get appointed. You have a job till age 75. You will get paid a base salary of $135,200, and it's even higher if you have other positions. Taxpayers themselves pay $14.2 million every year for the senators. With their expenses, it comes to over $89 million. And just think about Duffy and Brazeau and Wallen. If that's their expenditures, and this is coming from taxpayers' money, this clearly isn't acceptable. And the other point of that is absenteeism. If you're a senator, you don't have to go out to meetings, you don't have to show up every day. Who would want to do a job where you work and you don't have to show up every day and you get paid and you can stay till 75 and be paid over $100,000? My last argument is that the Senate is redundant. I think there's no need for it. As I mentioned before, it just votes and approves laws, and it can't pass laws without a Senate. That concludes my statement. Please vote for the motion.
The next speaker is the member of the opposition who will speak for 5 minutes. Please help me welcome Gurjot.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I think 5 minutes are too much to protest against what our government is proposing. I think my leader of opposition has answered most of the questions that were raised, but a couple of questions that have been raised that I would like to address. As Honorable Prime Minister mentioned that we just need one house, we don't need two houses. For that, I think if we had an ideal House of Commons, then we might think of not having a second house. But the thing is that we don't have an ideal House of Commons today, that we should do away with Senate. And mostly, and another point that has been raised again is against the appointment and the election of the Senate. Of course, leader of opposition said that that can be considered, but that doesn't tantamount to abolishing the Senate. Even if you elect people in the Senate, that might not be the best thing even, because you can still have the political bitterness and the partisanship that you see in the House of Commons that might happen in Senate again. The role of Senate is to complement or to balance the parliamentary system. That in one house you have the elected members, and in the second you have the appointed members who can be the distinguished Canadians who are from the different fields and who can bring different expertise into the different policy making decisions. And you can see the difference that Senate has made in so many positive things. The debate it raises, the question it raises, and you see the amount of depth that it delves into different discussions to form the policy. On the other hand, from the House of Commons, what you see is a lot of political bitterness. And when you have seen that somebody from the House of Commons has been awarded a significant position because they have made so much difference in the policy making, they have spent so much time in the policy making. No. What happens in the House of Commons, how people get into cabinet and they score when they score points on the opposition, they're camera friendly, or there are some geographical quota that they fulfill, that they get different positions in the House of Commons. But in the Senate, you know that these people don't get the cabinet berths, they don't get into the cabinet, and they're not rewarded based on scoring points on the opponents. They are rewarded, if any time, based on their in the contribution to the policy. And they make the parliamentary system work better with the debate they bring to the parliament. Of course, there is a point that there is a lot of partisanship because they toe the party lines and they have been elected by the prime minister. So there are more number of people from one party. Yeah, that's something that can be reformed, but that doesn't mean that it should be abolished. These are things that reformed and Senate can be rebuilt in a different way. But we shouldn't do away with such an important institution and another important point, there's a point about the House of Provinces. Of course, leader of opposition gave answer to that. But there's another important point, that if you see the proportion of women in the Senate has always been more than in the House of Commons. The number of people from different economic and religious backgrounds have been more, and it makes a diverse Senate that we need in a parliamentary process to represent people. and to actually present a debate in that matter. And also the more of the social and economic points have been raised by the Senate, not always the financial and monetary things. So that keeps the Parliament in balance, and it complements whether your House of Commons represent majority will. So Senate makes sure that it also represents and take care of the minority as well, and minority interests as well. And of course, there was a point about the GST debate. What happened with the 8 conservatives that were elected? There are a number of arguments on both sides, and of course, one can say that that was necessary to save the government at that point. That on a monetary bill, that government could be brought down. But regardless of that, what we are saying that Senate is not perfect. But no institution is perfect. But it is such an important institution that needs to be preserved. We need to rebuild it or reform it. Thank you very much.
The next speaker will present the opposition summation led by Dean. Please welcome Dean.
Madam Speaker, we, the opposition, believe that we have shown you reasons why the Senate should not be abolished, but should, if necessary, be revised, rebuilt, recreated, reformed. Not in the Reform Party reform, but just reformatted as far as its use to the Canadian public. It is the chamber of sober second thought. It is a balanced and complementary force to the House of Commons, which can be far-reachingly poor in its management of finances, federal and provincial interests, and as my companion has stated, the Senate can represent the minority voice, the regional voice, to the people of Canada and to the government itself. It is able to reflect on the bills that are being passed, to demand that the House of Commons be more strict, as we have stated. That having an appointment for a senator is not a bad thing. There are qualified people throughout the Canadian public who are senators and do their jobs well. The scandal that is currently happening notwithstanding, we must look on that positive force. Equal representation of the provinces is a good thing. We are an entire country, and we have to keep all interests in mind when we are creating laws to govern this country. And having restraint on the lower house, the House of Commons, is an important value that the Senate offers. We believe that the Senate, if abolished, the country would lose that with the Senate abolishment, and in fact, that it must be preserved, even if it must be changed. That process will take time, but we must use our sober second thought to do so.
The next speaker will present the government summation in 2 minutes. Please welcome David.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, we've heard an awful lot about what can happen in the Senate, but they haven't showed us just exactly how this can come about. It's all very well to conjure up a fanciful notion of these very eminent, sagacious, respected Canadians. Is any Prime Minister of the day going to offer Senate seats to David Suzuki or Peter Mansbridge or Margaret Atwood? No, they put people in there that they can control. The whole idea that we can have these people in there is founded on the idea that we never have had them. Granted, there are a few, but the point is that their voices are lost. Much Senate legislation, for example, is simply passed. They haven't rejected a bill from the Commons since 1939, 75 years. They did not show us how the senators, either elected or appointed, can escape the pressures of the ridings of home, the popular sentiment, the wishes of the Prime Minister, and so forth. people are not elected to the Senate or appointed to the Senate based on some kind of superior wisdom. They are chosen by their parties for their electability and their popularity, and that takes precedence. They did not answer the deadlock question of how the small number of provinces can block the will of the majority. They did not answer the partisan charge that we leveled, that they are co-opted from the very beginning. In 2 of our 3 arguments, we spoke about an elected Senate that have to answer to the populace at home. They did not answer that charge. We got a lot of platitudes. We didn't say that we didn't question Winston Churchill's dictum that democracy is the best thing, except for the worst thing, except for all the other forms. This was sheer fodder. The central arguments that we made were not answered in the opposition statements at all. So there is no reason to show, they have not shown, of how we are supposed to magically assemble these wonderful people with great integrity who can consider the national interest where it has never happened before. Thank you.
Now I would like to introduce our adjudicator, who will speak for 7 minutes. There will be a bell at 6 minutes and 2 bells at 7 minutes. Please help me welcome Jim.
Thank you, Danielle. Yes, I will speak for 6 minutes, speak for 7 minutes, and then I will sing for 3. Is it supposed to work? Oh, I don't know. Whatever. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. There was a considerable disagreement between the assistant adjudicator and myself. So, as I'm the one up here talking, I will go through my rationalisation. As it's just 7 minutes, I will keep it fairly brief. I'm glad the debate didn't resolve around just the expense scandal. There was a larger picture here. So it did extend a bit, and I have to thank the government. David set up the debate very well. He had 3 good arguments, and they were very well argued. But the overall picture was based around the one house, and this was his statement: one house is best of all. So one house to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them, is how I'd put it. Now, there's some good arguments, and the opposition missed a few of those, but he concentrated on the one house aspect, and that resonated with me, but I didn't give him as many marks as he might have done if he'd actually addressed fully the government's arguments. But it did resonate a lot that there is one house, and this was not necessarily any better. As my assistant points out, you can simply argue as opposition that all you got to do is make it better, and you can oppose any debate. So but the idea that the opposition put forward resonated with me more, and I gave more points to the government for their arguments and their content, because that was set up properly. And then the opposition came, and I felt handled all of the arguments that the government dealt with and nailed everything that they set up, not necessarily by the LO or the seconder, but together as a team. I felt that they actually handled the entire government's case and dealt it several fairly hefty blows. So Gurjot, I think, handled everything. It was all a little mismatched or all over the place, much like my adjudication, but order. But I think that he handled everything the government threw at it and came up with good arguments against everything, and came up with his own theories and his own opposing arguments, and worked very well with reinforcing the Prime Minister. So I felt that Gurjot pulled the whole thing together and brought the opposition more into the fore to be the arguments that appealed to me more. So I marked it around that base, I've just got a few other items that, debating-wise, might be of some use. The Prime Minister didn't necessarily use his time particularly well, and what I would like to see more often, if possible, is a quote or a humorous story to open up. It sort of enlivens the debate a bit. That seems to have gone by the board over the past few years, but that does actually help sometimes when you open up with a quote, hopefully valid, that brings people in on your side, and that also applies to the opposition. So another comment that I would like to make is people haven't really used their time well here, like not Gurjot, and Adrian used a whole minute or a minute and a half to give a whole list of senators that were appointed. That could have been dealt with in 5 seconds, 8 seconds, and gone on to reinforce other aspects. And also, in debating, it's an idea, to use an old cliche, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. Typically, we don't get the wind-ups, the summations at the end of each individual speaker, and that often helps people to crystallize what it is that they've said and say, oh yes, that is right, I see how that all fits in. And so that means use less time in the body of your speech and more time intro, more time extro or exit. So I hope that has gives you some concept of how I'm thinking about tonight's debate. I am restricted to the 7 minutes, and so the debate I gave to the opposition, 68 to 54, because I think that they tied it all up a little better than the government did, and there's a few holes that they exploited really well, and I gave the best debater to Gurjot. Thank you. Now I will sing for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to provide the popular vote, the trophy for the popular vote. The vote was 8 in favor of the government and 11 in favor of the opposition. So the motion was defeated. Turn off the camera.
Very good, sir. Congratulations.